Bonjour and hello. Let me try that again. Bonjour and hello. All right. Just want to make sure we're here together. My name is Dan Gannon, and I'm a lucky man. Primarily because I'm a white man living in the United States of America. That carries the weight of getting to start on the normal line every single day of my life. My skin color reps normal values, normal behaviors, normal attitudes. But I'm also a lucky man because ever since I was a little kid, my family told me I was Irish. I knew I was Irish before I knew I was white. This man behind me is my great-grandfather, John Byrne. He was a blacksmith in the village of Feathered in County Tipperary in Ireland. And he supported the struggle against the British Army and British government, which had been occupying and colonizing Ireland for centuries. In due part to that support of the struggle, his family was forced to leave Ireland piece by piece, and they immigrated to Chicago. I've had an idea in my head ever since I was small that fighting oppression is a good thing and supporting immigrants seeking a better life as well, because that's my family. Those values and concepts remain a key part of who I am today, especially as a white man. Now, I was born on the south side of Chicago, and to be proud of being Irish or Irish American there is as easy as brushing your teeth. But to bring up the issue or challenge a discussion around racism, especially back then, unfortunately, was all too rare. In fact, within my own family, racism was openly championed by my father, my uncles, my grandfather. To hear open racial slurs at our family gatherings was as expected as having turkey on Thanksgiving. And so I couldn't help but ingest that poison over the years and the many gatherings as a young person. But there was always a small voice in the back of my head that was confused and doubting those messages of hate because of our family's history of fighting back against the British Army. And occasionally I would hear my mom tell my dad to be quiet when he said something racist in the house in front of us. And so she became my first ever anti-racist role model. Thank you, Mom. I love you so. As I grew into my teens, the idea of contradicting or confronting either my dad or my grandfather was more or less out of the question. It was just too scary. I was terrified. And when I think of fear, I know how it can often protect us. I get it. But it can also paralyze us and unnecessarily and unfairly separate us from those who we view as different. As white people, we need to be unafraid when issues of racism arise. Because doing the right thing should not be a choice. I'll say that again. Doing the right thing should not be viewed as a choice because it's just what we do because we care. We care. So it came time for me to do the right thing. And I was going to stand up to my grandpa the next time I heard him say something racist. The rebellious sounds and attitudes of punk rock had created a major shift within me as I learned of bands and movements that oppose racism. I'm also the oldest grandchild of a very, very, very big family. And I felt a certain responsibility to my baby brother Matthew, who's 13 years my younger. So I didn't want him growing up hearing the same racial slurs that my sisters and I had. And so our family was gathering in Milwaukee for my sister Laura's college graduation. And I let my mom know that if I heard anything racist out of Grandpa's mouth, I was going to push back. I was ready. It was time. So on our way to dinner that night, my grandfather, proud Irishman and union organizer from the south side of Chicago via County Tipperary, let fly with a vicious string of racial obscenities, all the while staring me down, smiling and chuckling away, putting me in my place. I felt intimidated, shocked, humiliated, embarrassed. I remained silent. It was an epic fail. But my mother and my grandmother quickly spoke up and loudly chided my grandfather, telling him to shut his mouth and be quiet. I'd never heard anyone talk to my grandpa that way before. My huge fail turned into this incredible moment of solidarity as my mom and grandma stepped up and showed themselves to be allies. You never know. You never really know what will happen until you try. As the years went on, I never heard my grandfather say anything racist in front of us ever again. And I think that's the least we can do as white people, is to put the brakes on that type of open racial hostility. I was in awe of my grandpa and loved him very much. But the thought of holding him accountable was terrifying and scary. But I learned it's better to try and do the right thing than do nothing at all, even when seemingly failing. Fear can so often hold us back. We can get bogged down in worry over offending others, straining relationships, or become mired in guilt or resentment and do nothing at all. As I approached my mid-20s, it became increasingly important for me to be more actively engaged in fighting racism. And I was lucky enough to join an organization called Anti-Racist Action, or ARA. ARA was a youth-based movement founded in Minneapolis by a crew of anti-racist skinheads called the Baldies. And I'm sure many of you right now are thinking, did he just say anti-racist skinheads? What the what? What is that? Well, original skinhead culture came from Jamaican immigrants who immigrated to England. Along with them and their white working class neighbors and friends in the housing estates created this culture, and it was always multiracial from the get-go. Under Maggie Thatcher's government in the 80s, there was a racist party called the National Front Party who gained some traction, and they more or less kind of created the phenomena of neo-Nazi skinheads, which is what most of us think of today when you hear the word skinhead. But Minneapolis's Baldies were Native, Black, Latino, white, Asian. And the organization they founded exploded into dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of chapters across the US, Canada, and Mexico. ARA had 4 points of unity. 1, we go where they go. We do not allow white supremacists to have public space without a challenge. 2, we do not rely on the cops or the courts to stop white supremacy. It's up to us. 3, non-sectarian defense of anti-racists. If you end up in court because of an action or something we are involved in, we have your back regardless of your politics or your background. 4, we support reproductive freedom. In an era where doctors were being assassinated and organizations like Operation Rescue were creating havoc and terrorizing clinics across the country, ARA took a strongly feminist and anti-fascist position. Remember, this is youth. These are kids. I spent the next dozen or so years traveling throughout the Twin Cities metro and the greater Midwest, tracking and confronting various chapters of the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi organizations. ARA would go door to door in communities to inform them of white supremacists living on their block. We formed a cop watch patrol in downtown Minneapolis to combat police brutality. We would throw concerts to unite people around anti-racist politics, and generally we kept the neo-Nazis disorganized, hidden, and on the run. So my involvement in ARA saw the end of my fear in regards to fighting racism. Today, we see what can happen when white supremacists have room and support to organize themselves. They grow in size, they become emboldened, and become more dangerous. Now, the roots of racism is the concept and invention of whiteness. I think it's safe to say that today we understand whiteness as a completely made-up, false social construct, right? But it's changed over the years and fluctuated as to who is and who isn't defined as white. Italians, Greeks, Irish, and Jewish people have all been denied or admitted into this false construct of whiteness. There's no white land. There's no white food. There's no white music. Never mind actual white skin. No such thing at all. Yet we live in a very real and very white world, one which dominates our political institutions, our judicial system, our education system, and our media. on an individual level, our whiteness prevents us from being fully human, right? It stops us from growing, learning, and living together in diverse and dynamic communities. We miss out on untold relationships, experiences, and interactions. Our whiteness segregates us from large portions of our fellow community members. As I said, I'm a lucky man. I dropped out of college and was lucky enough to land a job at a child care center on the south side of Minneapolis. The families whose children I cared for and my coworkers reflected the diversity of the Phillips neighborhood, and I had never been around that many people of color on a daily basis in all my life. On my second day on the job, a large block fell on the fingers of a 4-year-old African-American girl and took off her fingernail. When her mom arrived to bring her daughter to the doctor, I faced the righteous ire of an angry black woman for the first time in my life because she blamed me because it happened under my watch. And even though I felt horrible about the accident and was scared and intimidated of the mom's anger and her intense emotions, I chose to stay right there and to listen to her and to acknowledge her feelings. As time went on, that mom and I built a very positive relationship. And I learned a valuable lesson that sometimes you just need to shut up and listen and believe. And so that daycare center became my university. And I was fortunate enough to be trusted by those families to care for their kids. And I deepened my understanding of the lives of poor and working class and single parent, black and native and Latino and white and immigrant families. Because too often our whiteness causes mistrust and fear and suspicion, all based off of decades and decades of unfair practices and out-and-out brutality. Our whiteness leaves us a life not fully lived. It robs us of our humanity. And so what our ancestors have built up, we can dismantle. What they have created, we can tear down. We can create change within our own communities, our families, our churches, our workplaces. How, you may wonder? Well, I challenge you to begin with one-on-one conversations. Speak up when someone around you says something racist, whether it's that crazy uncle at your family party or that coworker who you like, but who maybe hasn't seen too much of the world. Ask for clarification when someone says, those people. Let them know it's not okay with you. This is something we can do. Sometimes it's scary. It's often awkward, without a doubt, and it can be intimidating for sure. But it's nowhere near as difficult as having black or brown skin in the United States of America, nowhere near as difficult. Figure out who in your life is an ally. Reach out to them. Use each other as support and resources. Educate yourself about contemporary and historic race issues. Get involved in local community issues. Organize a book club. Go to powwows. Write a letter to the editor. Attend Bemidji's own monthly Truth and Reconciliation meetings if you want to listen in or participate in discussions on race right here in our community. Last but not least, research white anti-racists and learn from their words and actions. My personal hero is John Brown. The anniversary of the Harper's Ferry raid was just 2 days ago, on the 16th. Now, most white people, in my experience, view this man as a straight lunatic. But in the African American community, he is universally revered. And that tells me all I need to know. Or people like the Grimke sisters, who were the first female abolitionists, even though they came from a slaveholding family. Or the Reverend Robert Grates, whose home was firebombed by the Ku Klux Klan for his involvement in the civil rights movement. Or contemporary activists like educator Peggy McIntosh, or Minnesota's very own homegrown superstar Lindsay Whalen, who as captain of the Minnesota Lynx basketball team donned a Black Lives Matter t-shirt to support her teammates in speaking out against the police shootings of black people. And she sat side by side with them at a press conference to address the issue. When Lindsay Whalen was asked, why did she make that choice? Why did she stand up with her teammates? Her answer was simple, yet very powerful. Lindsay said, because it's important to do the right thing. So I ask of you to lose your fear. Have those difficult conversations. Become part of the change. Become more fully human. Miigwech and good night.